One of the hardest truths about relationships is that good intentions are not enough. You can mean well, you can even care deeply, you can love someone for real. You can think about reaching out all the time. You can tell yourself you're going to check in later. You could actually believe that the person matters to you. The relationship still can slowly go cold. That is what makes this so painful, because a lot of relationship loss does not come from fake care. It comes from unexpressed care. Care that stayed in your head. Care that never turned into a message. Care that never turned into a check-in. Care that never turns into a remembered detail at the right time. Care that was real but not visible enough to keep the relationship warm. I think a lot of people need language for that, because they think if the feeling is real, then the relationship should somehow stay strong on its own. Relationships do not live off private intentions. They live off contact. They live off follow through. They live off visible, repeated proof that the person still exists in your attention. That is what keeps a relationship alive. Not just how much you care in theory, but how often that care becomes something the other person can actually feel. That is where a lot of people get hurt without meaning to hurt anybody. They assume that the other person knows. They assume that love is obvious. They assume that the bond is strong enough to survive silence. They assume that good history will carry the relationship forward. They assume that they could always reconnect later. Later keeps moving. Life gets louder, days get fuller, stress piles up, and weeks blur together. Suddenly, a relationship that once felt easy starts feeling distant. Not because anybody turned evil, not because the whole world was being fake. The whole thing was being fake because good intentions stayed trapped inside thought instead of becoming action. That is the kind of drift. That is a very kind of real drift, because relationships do not usually starve from one missed moment. They starve from a pattern of almost reaching out, almost following up, almost asking how they're doing, almost checking in on how that thing they mentioned, almost checking on that thing they mentioned, almost being present, almost making time, almost saying what needed to be said. After enough almost, that relationship starts running on memory instead of current connection. The memory cannot hold warmth by itself. Memory can remind you why someone matters. It cannot replace fresh contact. It cannot replace feeling chosen in the present. It cannot replace the small moments that make care feel alive right now. That is why so many people can say things like, I still care about them a lot. I still care about them all the time. I never meant for us to drift. All of that can be true. The relationship still cooled off because care that stays private does not always protect closeness. That is a hard lesson. That is a super hard lesson, especially for a thoughtful person. Thoughtful people, especially for people who genuinely love others but do get overwhelmed. Especially for people who feel things deeply but do not always act on those feelings all the time. Especially for people whose life gets noisy enough that the people they care about start slipping through the cracks. Because then you start feeling guilty. You start feeling behind. You start feeling like a bad friend or a bad partner or a bad family member. A lot of the time, the issue is not that you are not incapable of care. The issue is that care without a system gets lost in the noise. That is what people do not always want to admit, because we like to think love should be effortless if it's real. We like to think that meaningful relationships should somehow maintain themselves. We like to think that good intentions should count for more than they do. In real life, what keeps a relationship warm is not only emotion, it is expression. It's timing. It's a memory turned into action. It is remembering what mattered and doing something about it before the silence gets too long. That is why relationships fade even when the love is real. Because real love still needs visible maintenance. Real friendships still need check-ins. Real care still needs follow-through. Real closeness needs updates. Otherwise, the relationship is starving. The relationship starts living on old information. Old information can only carry on so much. Because people change, life changes them, stress changes. them, and time changes them, responsibility changes them, pain changes them. If the relationship is not getting fresh contact, then eventually both people start feeling less reached, less seen, be less current with each other. That is where the distance grows quietly, slowly, without a single dramatic event. Honestly, this is why so many people feel confused in relationships that still technically exist. Because from outside, everything might still look fine. You still know each other. You still have history. You still care. You still think well of the person, of each other. The relationship itself feels thinner. What is missing is usually not some giant thing. It is missing small things. It's missing many small things. Like missing the things that matter the most, like checking in, following up, missing the remembering of the actual remembering, and missing the question, missing the effort to make care visible again. Because people do not only want to be loved in your mind, they want to feel loved in real life. They want to feel remembered in real life. They want to feel like they still mattered enough to reach toward. That is why good intentions are not enough. Good intentions are a start. They matter. They are real. They are not the whole job. That's why they're not the whole job. The whole job is turning care into action often enough that the relationship still feels alive. Honestly, this is bigger than romance. This happens in every important relationship. It happens with partners. It happens with friends. It happens with family. It happens in mentors. It happens with people you genuinely never wanted to lose touch with. The care is there. The intention is there. There is no system strong enough to help that care show up consistently. That is a huge part of why I care about building Everreach as a personal CRM. Because when I really look at meaningful relationships drift, the problem is not usually a lack of care. It's a lack of support around care. It is the fact that good intentions get buried under daily life. It is the fact that people rely on memory alone. It is the fact that they think of someone but do not follow through in the moment. It is the fact that what matters stays in the head of someone, in the head, instead of becoming a real check-in. That is where Everreach fits for me. Not as some cold contact manager, not as a robotic system for human connection. The opposite of that. It's a personal CRM that helps care become more reliable. A system that helps people remember who matters, what matters, when to check in, what needs follow through, and what conversation should not be left sitting for too long. Because most people do not need help caring more, they need help acting on care more consistently. That is the real problem. Once you see that a lot of relationships pain start making more sense. It is not always about whether the love was real. Sometimes the love was real but unsupported. Sometimes the bond was real but under-maintained. Sometimes the friendship was real but left to chance. Sometimes the relationship did not need more feeling. It needed more follow-through. Follow-through does not always mean some giant emotional performance. Most of the time, it means a small message at the right time. It means remembering the thing they said mattered. It means checking in before the distance hardens. It means showing that the person still exists in your attention even when life is loud. That is what keeps relationships alive. Not intensity once in a while, continuity over time. Not one big speech, repeated contact. Not private care alone, visible care. And I think that changes the whole way people should look at connection. Because now the question is no longer I care about this person. The better question is, has my care been visible enough for this relationship to stay warm? That question is way more honest, because a lot of people are carrying relationships in their heart while leaving them unsupported in real life. They wonder why their bond feels weaker. The answer is usually simple. If it hurts, the relationship was being asked to survive on intention alone. And intention alone is too fragile in a noisy life. That is why small systems matter. That is why memory support matters. That is why check-ins matter. That is why follow-through matters. Because the people who matter should not be left to random chance. They should only live in your they should not only live in your good intentions, they should be part of a real pattern of care. That is what I want. That is what I want Everreach as a personal CRM to stand for. Helping people turn real care into everyday continuity. Helping people protect meaningful relationships before they quietly cool off. Helping people remember and act before it later turns into too late. Because relationships do not need a miracle. They need someone to stop assuming that care silently is enough. Caring silently is enough. Start making the care visible while there is still warmth to build on. Shortcut points. Good intentions are real, they are not enough. Relationships do not live off private care, they live off visible care. A lot of relationships start from the pattern of almost. Care without a system gets lost in the noise. People do not only want to be loved in your mind, they want to feel loved in real life. Everreach is a personal CRM that helps care become more reliable. The people who matter should not be left alone to memory. Okay.